Hello, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well today. So today we are going to be talking about Samhain. So what is Samhain? To summarize, it is the end of the harvest season. Why is it important? Is it represents a time for the Celtic people in which they would prepare for winter and the next planting season. Many early pagan holidays revolved around agriculture and did not follow anything resembling the modern calendar. So, Samhain, like Imbolc, Baltana, or Lunasa, is a quarter day falling between the equinox and solstice. In this case, the autumn equinox and the winter solstice. It is also the beginning of winter or the dark half of the year. Its origins are not entirely known, but it is dated to the Neolithic period. So anywhere between 6,000 and 10,000 years old, there's evidence of something happening around this time of year in Celtic Europe. In particular, in Ireland, the Neolithic passage tombs are actually aligned to see the sunrise at the time of Samhain. So we know that they had this calendar system in place to remind them of this time of year. And again, that all centers around agriculture, the end of the harvest season. This is also, of course, food's not going to grow. So there's all of these myths and tales about practices around the time, and some of them are real or based on real things that people did, such as the example of sacrifice. We have a kind of a modern interpretation or idea of what sacrifice means to ancient pagan people. In reality, animal sacrifice amongst the Celts was most likely just the butchering of livestock, and outsiders may have seen it as something else. So don't always take stock in what you read or hear about these. There's often a practical purpose. There are some traditions, and we're going to go over some of those that are practiced that are spiritual or religious based. So some of these traditions eventually formed around that time, like I said, did follow their religious beliefs. The traditions of bonfires. Bonfires are a cleansing thing. The fire burns away the bad kind of idea. That still exists in many forms to this day. Again, I mentioned the sacrifices, which in reality was probably just butchering of livestock in preparation for meat preservation. Now, they probably did pray to their gods, and there may have been sacrifice to that, but that's most likely what it was. Some of the spiritual connections for the Celtic people, both around Samhain and Beltane, the liminal times of the year, or these halfway points between the solstice and equinox, it was believed that our world existed on one plane, and on the other plane is the other world, or their afterlife. And at these times, these two worlds came so close that spirits could cross over that barrier. And so now we start to get into some of the more modern beliefs we talk about. Eventually, the Christianization of Ireland and of Celtic people in general kind of blended these all together. And eventually, Samhain it was around the time of All Saints' Day or All Souls' Day, and eventually culminated in what we now know as All Hallows' Eve or Halloween. And that's what we're here today to do. Some of the traditions of the ancient Celts that are still practiced to this day that were done thousands of years ago, in particular the act of guising or dressing up, had its origins there. And the belief was that if you dressed up, the spirits from the other world couldn't recognize you. So if there was a spirit who was after you for one reason or another, they couldn't come and find you if you were in disguise. So that's where kind of the idea of dressing up in costume came from. One of the other practices, and one of my favorite, there's also trick-or-treating. That actually had its origins in that too. You'd go house to house to your neighbors to collect food. And what that was really just a sharing of the bounty. Everybody would plant different things. So now you're sharing your bounty with your community. And that's kind of where the idea of trick-or-treating comes in. The idea of giving the food and asking for food. So it all goes back to that. Again, everything that may have had some sort of weird spiritual or supernatural belief also had origins in real practical applications of things. So one of my favorites, though, And this one didn't necessarily have a practical application, that's now is the carving of pumpkins. And back in ancient Ireland, they didn't have pumpkins, but they did have turnips. And they used to carve turnips. And the reason for this is they would carve the turnip and put a face on it, and then they'd put a piece of coal in it. And it would shine through, just like we have pumpkins now. Well, pumpkins, that didn't really happen until the Irish, now Christianized Irish, came to North America, and they had gourds and pumpkins. But the idea was that when you carried this around while going door to door, dressed up, this looked like a spirit, and it would scare off other spirits. So they also put them in their windows to keep the spirits out of their houses. It was a way to keep the spirits from crossing you over into the other world. And so today we're going to carve a turnip like we do every year. Normally we do this at the Universalist Unitarian Church, in Knoxville during their trunk or treat event. And we always have a good time. We miss being there. We hope you guys are doing safe. So today we're going to carve a turnip. It's going to be a little funky, but I'm going to try and do it. Okay, so first you need, of course, your turnip. And you're going to need a sharp knife, and I recommend a melon baller. That works really well. So the first thing you got to do, I'll tilt my camera down a little bit here so we can see, is you got to cut the top off the turnip. Now kids, if you're doing this, please be careful, have your parents involved, because sharp knives can be dangerous. I'm going to say that and probably accidentally hurt myself now. Now turnips, unlike pumpkin, are solid all the way through. So one thing about them, this is the reason for the melon baller, is you can't just use a spoon to scoop them out like you could a pumpkin. It just doesn't work that way. Another tool you could use a spoon, especially if it has a sharper edge on it. So, as you can see, it's solid all the way in there. Sharp spoon, also clay carving tools work good for this. We've done that one year as well. Keep a bag handy because there's going to be a mess. So you just got to literally go around and scoop out the inside of the turnip, chunk by chunk. Simple as that. And also, unlike a pumpkin, like I said, it doesn't have, a pumpkin or a gourd has a hard kind of shell to it. Turnips do not. It is all rind. It's all one solid piece. So you want to be careful when you get to the edge. You don't want to get too thin through it. So we're just going to keep going, carving this out. One of the little traditions that we have now too, I don't think I'll do it today, but when we show the kids how to do this at the Unitarian Church, we always end up eating pieces of it. All the kids want to know what it tastes like. Raw turnip is not very good. Who knows? I may indulge though, just for the heck of it. It doesn't take too long. You don't have to completely hollow it out. You just got to get down far enough that you can carve a face into it. This is a particularly large turnip, so it's going to be a little bit tougher to get. Oops. And of course, I'm in a borrowed room today, so it's going all over the floor. But you'll hear a lot of stories of the jack-o'-lantern and how it started and all this and the tales of the name. The name, you know, there's some stories in Great Britain concerning it. But really the tradition of actually doing it goes back to the ancient Celts. And when I say the Celts, I mean, it's not just Ireland, Scotland, the Isle of Man, the Manx people. You know, the Celts were throughout all of Europe, mostly Northern Europe. There's even connections to the Germanic tribes from when the Celts had conquered the Germanic tribes during the reign of Rome. You'll even see some artwork that connects them. So when the Norsemen, for instance, or what people like to call the Vikings, came over to Great Britain and eventually made their way around the Hebrides of Scotland over to Ireland, the now Christian Irish still had a lot of their saints. Well, their saints were deified versions of their pagan gods and heroes. And when the Norsemen heard these tales of these characters, they drew a lot of similarities. And that's because it goes back thousands of years to when the Celts ruled most of Northern Europe. And again, you talk about the Christianization of Ireland, and we mentioned it here with Halloween and All Hallows Eve and All Saints Day. That was all a part of it, and their traditions still exist. Their pagan traditions still exist in one form or another in many Christian practices. So, it's an interesting blend, and it's something that Ireland's always kind of had. You hear it in religion, you hear it in traditions and just practices. And today, like I said, we're going to be practicing one of my favorites. I love doing this. This is a lot tougher than carving pumpkins, but it is so fun and it's neat. And if you go online and you look up carved turnips, you'll see some plaster casts. They're not real turnips because they can't be preserved for 1,000 years, but you'll see some plaster casts of ancient carved turnips, and they're really creepy looking, and they're great. I love them. Let's keep hollowing it out. And I'm going to be honest with you, a smaller turnip would probably be a little bit easier to do. You can use those pumpkin carving kits that you get for like $5 at Walmart or Joann's. That'll help. But we're almost there. Now, one thing I will say, much like lighting pumpkins, you can use a candle. However, it will cook it, so be careful of that. Tea candles work best. Or you can use one of those little LED tea lights. Those work really good. It doesn't cook it. And you still get to display your jack-o'-lantern. Almost there. There we go. Okay, so that's good enough for now. Just for our purposes, I think that's good enough. So, as you see, it is pretty solid. It's pretty thick. I mean, you'll end up with a healthy dose of turnip chunks here. So, once we get that done, now we gotta pick our face. So let's do it on this side right here. Let's see what this guy's going to look like. We just kind of go in with the knife. Till we cut out something of a face. And I left this one pretty thick, so you can thin yours out more. It's all good. It's your jack-o'-lantern. You can do what you want with it. Nobody's going to tell you you carved it wrong. we got our mouth. And this one, like I said, is pretty thick. You can see the mouth. If I lit it, you wouldn't be able to see much of it. But now let's do a simple nose. Like I said, a good sharp knife definitely helps. Be very careful though if you're using one. Yeah, always follow those rules of cutting away from yourself. Now he's got his nose. We're almost there. Let's give him some scary eyes. Oops. I don't think I cut that enough. There we go. Now we got one eye. And let's do the other one. And now we have our jack-o'-lantern. And again, you can put a candle in these guys, but it will kind of cook them. And, you know, just be safe with it. Be safe when you're carving one. Be safe if you light it. But these are a lot of fun. They're a little bit different than pumpkins. They're a lot tougher to carve than pumpkins, but they're a lot of fun and they're very traditional. And I invite you guys to please join in this tradition. It's one of my favorites. I just really enjoy it. So please, again, have a fun, safe, Samhain, Hallows Eve, Halloween, and hopefully we'll see you soon.